So today we're here to talk about clinical trials, and with me is Dr. Nick Cunniffe, who was a part of the clinical trial that I was involved in myself. Thank you for taking part, Nick.
And, thank you for having me.
And I think, let's start with, what is a clinical trial?
Yeah, so what is a clinical trial? I mean, I guess the starting point is to say that a clinical trial is essentially an experiment that allows doctors to determine whether treatments are beneficial to people living with an illness. Now, you may hear about different phases of clinical trials. Well, these largely reflect the size of the trial, but also the scope of the question that's being asked. For instance, there's phase 1 studies, and they're the smallest, and largely a mechanism to determine the safety of any potential treatments, alongside any dose considerations as well. Then there are phase 2 studies that are slightly larger, and these are generally to see if drugs are effective, as well as starting to examine their side effects. And then finally, we have perhaps the most important studies, which are the phase 3 studies, which are much larger, generally involving hundreds, sometimes even thousands of people. And these aim to robustly test whether a drug is safe and effective. And of course, on the fringe of that, you do have phase 4 studies, phase 4 trials as well, but they're generally focused on research that's done once a drug is already in use.
So when people want to sign up for them, what should they expect? What's in a trial?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different ways of designing and structuring a clinical trial. I mean, the most common and the best way of determining whether a drug is effective is in what's known as a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. So I think what people should expect in such a study is to be randomly assigned to either receiving an active treatment or even to receive a matched placebo or dummy drug. And the element in the title of being double-blinded means that neither the participant nor the study team actually know what the participant is taking. So I think that's really important, because that allows you to have 2 or sometimes more in bigger studies matched groups, so we can precisely quantify the effects of a potential treatment.
One question that we see popping up quite a lot of the time here at the MS Trust is, why does it take so long for MS drugs to get to the market from the sort of research stage to the actual getting them?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the answer speaks to the point I made in the first question. I mean, it's really important to demonstrate that the medicines are both safe and effective before they can be rolled out to everyone living with a particular illness. And that really does mean going through the various different processes, the different stages that I just outlined. I mean, it has to be said that it's an unfortunate reality that lots of drugs that show promise in preclinical studies are not effective when it comes to clinical trials. So it's really important to go through each of those different steps just to make sure that the right treatments are brought forward into widespread use. A particularly appealing approach that's received more attention recently is to try and speed up drug development, is actually to try and repurpose treatments that are already licensed for other indications, because that can bypass some of the earliest stages. But in reality, there's a time lag of many years before a drug is proven to be both safe and effective and allow it to be brought forward into clinical practice.
So what trials are you working on at the moment?
Yeah, so I work in the Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair, and you mentioned your trial before. That was CCMR1, Cambridge Centre for Myelin Repair Trial 1. So I'm now working on the CCMR2 trial. So in this trial, we're testing the combination of 2 drugs that, as I mentioned before, are already licensed for other diseases. So we're testing metformin, which is already in widespread use for diabetes, alongside clemastine, which is an antihistamine, which can be used in hay fever. And we know that the combination of these 2 drugs can significantly enhance the repair process, or remyelination, when they're used in animals. And because we know they're safe in other illnesses, we can bypass that phase 1 step and go straight to a phase 2 trial. And that's what CCMR2 is. It's a phase 2 trial. And just like I mentioned before, it's an example of a randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial. And just to review what that means, it means that half the participants on this trial are going to receive the active drugs, so the combination of metformin and clemastine, and half will receive matched placebos. And they're allocated at random, so neither participant nor we as the study team know who's taking what. In CCMR2, we're testing the drugs in two key ways, with a test of nerve function, which is an eye test using what's called visual evoked potentials, and that allows us to measure repair of the visual pathway, which, as we know, is frequently involved in the course of MS. Mm. And second, we use a test of nerve structure with specialized MRI brain scans that allow us to measure remyelination within MS lesions.
That sounds exciting. So how far along are you in this? Are you recruiting, or are you just starting?
We are just starting. We're 2 months in. We're aiming for 50 participants. We have 6 so far. So yeah, definitely recruiting. It might be that some people listening are interested in taking part. I think the first thing to stress is that it's a single centre study based in Cambridge, and we're aiming to recruit people that are fairly local to us, so within a couple of hours of Cambridge, really, just because of the number of visits that are required. Mm-hmm. But just to summarise a few other selection criteria, just in case that people are interested, to take part in this particular trial, you'd need to have relapsing remitting MS, be aged between 25 and 50 years, and be stable on a disease-modifying treatment. I mean, there's a really good scientific reason for this, because we want to make sure that the inflammation of MS is well controlled, and we do that with the DMTs that we take, and that's really so that we can study the repair process happening in some degree of isolation.
That sounds exciting. So you were mentioning the specific criteria for this trial, but in general for trials, what should people think about before they sign up?
Yeah, I mean, I think the starting point is to say that I think clinical trials are really great, because it's a cooperation between patients and doctors, both trying to find effective treatments together. And, one of the real benefits to clinical trials is that for some participants, it means having access to treatments that are not otherwise available to them. But being a participant on a trial is not a trivial matter. There's a possibility of side effects with any experimental drug. There's also the burden of on people's time, because, I mean, for instance, using my trial as an example, CCMR2, it's going to involve 7 visits to the hospital over a period of 7 months. And after all this investment of your time, you might be assigned to a control group and not actually receive the treatment being studied. So I think the key thing to say is that if you're thinking about signing up for a trial, it's really important to read through all of the information about the trial, take an opportunity to speak to the trial team, and really make sure that you've had a chance to ask any questions you have before signing up.
Do people get paid for taking part in trials?
I mean, it varies on the particular trial. In some trials, people are paid for their time, for their participation. In others, people are paid for their travel expenses. So you mentioned getting into Cambridge. So for my study, we're paying reasonable travel expenses and parking for our participants, but there's no formal payment for actual participation. It's just the travel expenses. But it varies from one trial to the next, and that's a really good question that would be one to put to the study team if there was one in particular that someone was thinking about participating in.
And how do people actually find out about what clinical trials are going on at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, there are various sources of information. I mean, the most user-friendly sources of information, and probably the most the most comprehensive lists that I've seen are actually on the MS charity website. So both the MS Society and the MS Trust have really good information on this. I mean, there are more there are larger, should I say, repositories of clinical trials out there. So one example is a website called clinicaltrials.gov, and that's a repository of trials used by both academic and pharmaceutical companies. Yeah, it really can be quite a long list and quite daunting to go to. So I think actually the charity websites are, generally speaking, as a good starting point.
If somebody with MS have looked at this list, of trials that's going on and they want to take part, how should they go about doing it?
Yeah, I mean, I think if someone living with MS wanted to learn more about participating in a particular trial, I think it's worth reaching out to that trial team and speaking with them directly. But alternatively, I think there's also your usual MS neurologist is a good person to speak to, because they'll often be able to refer anyone to trials that they might potentially be eligible for, and also know what trials are happening or coming up in the local area. So definitely speaking to your usual neurologist is a way forward.
Excellent. So, and then just looking to the future, I guess, what trials would you like to see happen in the future?
Yeah, I think for the last 30 years or so, the research community has been so focused on drugs to stop inflammation in the brain. I mean, now that they've largely achieved this, we need to repair the damage that inflammation does. And I think the main way to do this is to encourage the brain stem cells that we all have to repair myelin. And so I'm particularly excited about remyelinating treatments being taken forwards. We've now seen 3 phase 2 trials show a positive result of sorts in clinical trials. So it's not long before remyelinating therapies reach phase 3 trials, and therefore we can robustly say whether or not they're going to have an effect on people with MS. We think they will. It's just a matter of time before we can demonstrate that in a trial. So I think kind of what excites me, I think armed with a combination of DMTs, a remyelinating treatment that I hope to see very soon, perhaps a neuroprotective treatment as well. We're armed with that combination, we'll be much closer to realizing our ambition, which is largely to for people with MS to be only minimally affected by the illness.